Welcome to this section 27 Karen Armstrong Enlightenment Anthology task. Let's read it and then we'll analyze it. At this point, Mar approached Gautama and engaged him in a strange conversation. He told Gautama to rise from this seat. It does not belong to you, but to me. Gautama, Mara thought, had transcended the world. He was invulnerable to all external opposition. But Mara was the lord of this world, and he it was, the Karavati, who should sit on its pivotal center. He did not realize that the rage, hatred, and violence that he had just exhibited disqualified him from taking up his position under the Bodhi tree, which belongs only to the man who lives by compassion. Gautama pointed out that Mara was quite unprepared for enlightenment. He never made any spiritual efforts, had never given alms, had never practiced yoga. So Gautama concluded, this seat does not belong to you, but to me. He went on to add that in a previous life, he had given away all his possessions and had even laid down his life for others. What had Mara done? Could he produce witnesses to testify that he had performed such compassionate deeds? At once Mara's soldiers cried as one man, I am his witness. And Mara turned triumphantly to Gautama and asked him to validate his own claims. So again, why is Armstrong's definition of Mara so limited? And why is it thought strange? At this point, Mara approached Gautama and engaged him in a strange conversation. Strange, Armstrong thinks it's strange her readers are reluctant to open up their imaginations. Remember, Armstrong's readers are secular, maybe atheist readers who have an immanent frame way of thinking, or better, imagining. They can only imagine a flat world, a world without a transcendent. They can't imagine an enchanted world, a world with a transcendent way of imagining, or a transcendent frame, to use Charles Taylor's, the sociologist's language. So it's only strange until we understand this is a dramatized text written to people who wouldn't suffer from the same lack of imagination or limited imagination. These people were not like us. They weren't modern, secular, historically reductionistic in their ways of accounting for the world. They're narratives. So what is Armstrong doing? Her emotive narrative term strange is an equivocating term, neither true nor false. Is there a transcendent world or not? She doesn't commit. She's a mystical kind of person, but she doesn't commit. So does Armstrong assume in her narrative a sacred, secular, fact, value, post-Kantian dichotomous way of thinking? He told Mara to arise from his seat. It does not belong to you, but to me. So Armstrong here is articulating a dualistic, secular Buddhist view of the metaphysical world that interprets the Buddha as the sacred and perhaps Mara as the secular. in a way that would not be accepted by the folk Buddhists of this quote. Remember, this quote is coming from this 5th century text, 550 folk tales of the previous Buddha's life, the introduction to it. All of this from this introduction, this Jakata Katha, is a folk tale. And these folk Buddhists are not so indisposed to the supernatural. So if we go back to this word transcended, there's the immanent and there's the transcended. Gautama Mara thought had transcended the world. He was invulnerable to external. So is there a transcendent? Armstrong is trying to pull together her audience of Western secular pluralist thinkers and the Eastern way of non-theistic way of thinking that accepts the transcendent. So is the Caravati a reference to Asoka? But Mara was the lord of this world, and it was he, the Caravati, who was... Now, Caravati refers in Sanskrit Indian thought to an ideal universal ruler, especially in the sense of an imperial ruler of the entire subcontinent. And it's hard not to think of someone else but the case of Asoka of the Mauritian Empire. Despite not conquering maybe some of the southern kingdoms of India, Asoka had a capital city in the northeast in the 3rd century, Andapura, from which he ruled. I wonder, is this echoing the background of Asoka? By the 5th century, Asoka was long dead and gone. Remember, he's 3rd, 2nd century BC, and this text, this anthology, this is a 5th century, 500 years later. And Asoka would be a renowned member of history, perhaps by analogy. So is this a reference to Asoka? Maybe, maybe not. So is Buddhism, in Kant's language, theonomous, i.e. it gets its legitimacy, its authority from the divine, from especially a God? And is it autonomous? Does moral authority, religious and philosophical authority come from human reason and my reason, individual's reason? Or is it heteronomous? Does authority come from someone like an earthly ruler? Just what is the pivotal center of everything? How should we think about ethics and theology and everything? So ironically, many forms of Buddhism are kind of theonomous, or better maybe non-theonomous, in the sense of not a personal theo or God, but a sort of impersonal authority that comes down mystically through the structures of religion. And they've sought to build theocracies, so societies that the highest authority is the religious authority. To give an example, the mullahs of Iran, in terms of Islam, are theocracies. Now, Sri Lanka, in a sense, is a theocracy, or perhaps a non-theocracy, in the sense of the clerics claim to have mystical access to the ultimate truth, but they are non-personal. They are so non-theistic. So autonomy is the belief that morality exists independent of religion and philosophy, and ideas are shaped or should be shaped by reason alone. Theonomy, from the theos, God, and nomos, laws, that are the God's law word, including judicial rules, laws. The Old Testament should be observed by modern societies. These terms were used by Kant and developed in Paul Tillich's systematic theology. Heteronomy, morality is, and when you look at religion and morality, you can make a nice link there to ethics. And when you look at Kant and his anthology piece. You can make a nice link there, and his ethics. Morality is dependent on an authority, which may be religious or just a king or a government. Its rules are taken from religious teachings, and practice are just secular sentiments and consensus. So these are Kant's ideas developed by Paul Tillich. But what is the pivotal center? That's the question. Who is or what is the Caravati we should pay obeisance to? Is it this non-theistic ultimate? Is it the individual, as Western individualists would say? Or is it, in some heteronymous sense, a government or an earthly power? Well, more likely it's what Armstrong identifies here. It's not the Buddhist practice, but what she's perceiving, in fact, are the key folk Buddhist practices of these very late folk Jataka tales, 550 of them in this 5th century, very hagiographic account. And she doesn't try to be critical, that these may be quite different to what the historical Buddha did, or at least quite different to maybe what's in the Pali canon, at least an embellishment, an extension, and lots of additions to what's there, if not entirely contradictory. So is Armstrong's account of the actual Buddha's actual practices accurate? He did not realize that the rage, hatred, and violence that he had just exhibited disqualified him. He didn't do the practices from taking up his position under the Bodhi tree, which belongs only to the man who lives by compassion, the practice of living by compassion. So what is the actual textual source of the Buddha's previous lives that Armstrong account here is using, and is it helpful? Well, let's just back up a second. Mara was quite unprepared for enlightenment, never made any spiritual efforts, never given alms, never practiced yoga. Remember, Armstrong is interested in any old practices, whether that are mystical, and they could be Buddhist, or they could be Christian, or they could be Hindu. And she's quite interested in the pre-Buddhist practices that frame the Buddha as just one mystic amongst many. So what about the textual sources? He went on to add that his previous lives, he'd given away all his possessions and even laid down his life for others. So in his previous life, what is the textual source here? Well, Armstrong has already admitted that she's using this introduction to this 5th century collection of 550 Jataka folk stories of the Buddha's previous lives. And the next statement is curious, unless you understand the ancient 5th century, not AD, but BC, and its cultural attitudes, the importance of witnesses. Could he produce witnesses? I am his witness in thinking in terms of law or jurisprudence. If you want to establish authority heteronymously, theonymously, autonomously, how do you know you should listen to someone, that they are a proper heteronymous authority, or perhaps even theonymous authority? Well, either by their own virtue or because others say they're virtuous, say they should be listened to, that are prepared to support them. Still the same today. We like to have character references. So Armstrong does not tell us the context of what she's reading here. She has done already, but she doesn't acknowledge the tenuous nature of this late hagiography. What about the witness? So what is the significance of the idea of the witness that is kind of left in the end underexplored? At once Mara's soldiers cried out as one man, "I am his witness." And Mara turned triumphantly to Gautama and asked him to validate his own claims. Well, witnesses were an important part of authenticity, authority, and truthfulness. Establishing the truth claims in court or in life in the ancient world depended on witnesses. So it would be only to be expected. Remember, Buddhism is kind of making political claims. It's expecting, Buddhism kind of expects patronage from, it likes patronage from the authorities of any given society. It's like a state religion in Sri Lanka, certainly, in Thailand and in other places. So it would only be to be expected. The narratives around the authority of the Buddhist reflect such Buddhist truth claims, that he has witnesses. So this was section 27.